Counselor Lunt?
Here.
Counselor McTevier?
Here.
Counselor Bickford?
Here.
Counselor Pesky?
Here.
Counselor Kraft?
Here.
Counselor Burnett?
Here.
And I'll turn the meeting over.
Very
And
good.
you are?
Phil Ruck.
Welcome, Phil.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Phil Ruck, and as I said, we're going back to school today. This is a really healthy crowd for a stormwater education program. Before we jump in, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. For the town of Lisbon, I was just contracted as part of an engineering team recently, working with Alver Associates and Mandy Alver. I'm sure you probably have seen her at one point or another. But I bring stormwater expertise and some environmental engineering to the table. I'm a licensed engineer in the state of Maine. I've been doing engineering and science work for well over 25 years now, and I've specialized in the field of stormwater management. So I've been working with municipalities primarily up in the Bangor area. I live in Orono. My office is in Orono. Started my own company a couple of years ago, and still doing a lot of municipal and industrial stormwater pollution, as well as pollution prevention, as well as civil engineering as well. So, but stormwater has been my thing from the get-go. I'm going to tell you about the program that Lisbon, one of the lucky two that just joined the MS4 program in the state of Maine, and Sabattis has been in for a while, but this is a joint meeting. You have a lot of similar issues. I'm going to talk about those and some of the ideas that I have, but I just wanted to give you the basics. Again, this is a 6-hour class Dennis and I talked about. There won't be a test, I'll be gentle. All right, first of all, this is a federal program, and just because of that, you have to have a ton of acronyms. It's just the way it works. You gotta confuse everybody to the best extent you can. So, what is an MS4? That's the question of the day. All this is, it's a municipally owned storm sewer system. So, everything the town of Lisbon owns in the in the right of way, all the stuff that you guys have, the basins, the catch basins, the gutters, the ditches, all that stuff that manages stormwater that somebody built is part of an MS4. Kind of a clunky term, but that's the EPA. It has to be owned or operated by the city, as I said. Private property does not fall into this permit program. And you also have to have discharges to waters of the state. Could be wetlands, could be streams, could be rivers. Wetlands are included in this equation. So the question is stormwater runoff too. Well, stormwater runoff is the biggest non-point source pollution. So you get a lot of, like wastewater treatment plants right up Mandy's, alley there, as far as a lot of work that all of our associates does. But they have waste discharge licenses to deal with end of pipe. Stormwater is one of those things that's called a non-point source pollution. It can drain off of everywhere, but there's an awful lot of pollutants in stormwater. And the state and the federal programs, they've been looking at this for quite some time. In Lisbon, now that you're a regulated community, and Sabattis has been for a little while, we have to deal with that. But it's not just the rain that's falling from the sky. That snowpack, well, the snow dumps you have in town where you plow your snow, all of that stuff, if you look at any big snowbank, and there's some big ones now, all the gravel, all the stuff that's trapped in that pile, when that melts and drains somewhere, that's part of this program too. That's considered stormwater runoff. So keep that in mind. How you manage snow is a big piece of this program. This is an issue that we've actually been wrestling with in the state, educating people not just about stormwater, but what happens. So when you get a drop of rain, in a watershed, if anything falls within that dashed line there, it's all going to come to, usually a collection point, a stream or a low point or a ditch for that matter, and it all drains down to one location. We've actually worked with a lot of people, and we did a survey back in the start of this program where you'd ask a variety of people just stormwater questions, what they knew about it. We had, people that live right on a lake shore that didn't understand that they live in a watershed. Pretty much everybody lives in a watershed is the way it works, and you have to understand that. So where rain hits in Lisbon, where's it going to go? Where's it going to discharge to? What water bodies are impacted by that? That's a big program, and I'm going to get into all the different aspects, but the education component of this program is huge. So again, non-point source pollution. I mean, this is pretty typical. You've got a whole mix of things going on here. We got a farm field over here, so you got agriculture, you know, maybe pesticides, herbicides, those kinds of things. So spreading on the fields, you get some rain. Not all of that perhaps is going to go into the ground, so you might have some runoff from some issues over here. Then we have the nice subdivision. There's some really nice looking green lawns on some of these. Again, you know, how they manage their lawns on a private subdivision. So there's all kinds of sources, from the pavement into the storm drain system. It looks to me like that might be a low point, either the edge of the field or maybe a low point. But all that runoff from the agriculture, from the housing development there, all that goes somewhere. And there's a lot of different pollutants that get trapped up in stormwater. For instance, again, I mentioned the largest water quality problem in the U.S. and in the world, for that matter. Stormwater is a really big deal, but typical pollutants, you know, you're going to get heavy metals. Parking lots, you get a lot of vehicles, so you're going to get a lot of heavy metals. Trash is an obvious one. Fecal bacteria, pet waste is actually a really significant source of pollutants in stormwater. A lot of the regulated communities, if you go around the state, you go down to Portland, every park that there is has a pet waste bag, pet waste ordinances to deal with this kind of thing. All those are typical pollutants in stormwater. Nutrients, again, from, you know, phosphorus fertilizers, how people spread fertilizers and deal with their lawn is a big issue. Part of the things that MS4 communities have to deal with. And certainly petroleum products, typical parking lot situation, you get the sheens everywhere, very common in developed areas. And the whole point of all this, you get all these pollutants that are going to our waterways as a result of stormwater runoff, and the thing that we want to avoid as much as possible is that ticket down there, impaired streams. A lot of communities around the state are dealing with this issue, and it costs a lot of money to fix it. So the state is assigned classifications for all the water bodies in Maine. I was just at a conference today hearing a bunch of people talking about that. But they rate what the stream quality should be, whether it's going to be fishable or swimmable or something like that. But you add in a bunch of stormwater pollutants, sediment loading, all those things in developed areas, the water quality in those streams goes down. And if DEP figures that out through a testing program, and they figure out you have an impaired stream, they want you to fix it. In Bangor, for instance, Bangor has 6 urban impaired streams. They're in the news a fair bit. Right through the Bangor Mall, there's a small stream. It used to be farm fields, you know, 30, 40 years ago. But now that stream is impaired because of all the development around here. Lisbon, and I'm going to talk about this in a bit, Lisbon actually has a stream that's been identified by DEP with some water quality issues. We're not quite certain the direction that's going to go, but I'll be talking about that in a little bit. But trying to avoid the urban impaired stream problem is a really big deal. So urban areas, these are your common culprits. You know, you've got typical pollutant sources. You get a lot of construction in urban areas, so you know, if people aren't putting up their silt fences, those kinds of things, and you get a big rainstorm, you're going to have chocolate milk running off site. So construction activity is big. Obviously, urban development, you've got a lot of rooftops, you've got a lot of roadways, all that impervious area. The more impervious area you have, you know, with studies and DEP, you know, all the folks, the regulators say, you get more than like 10% of one of the watersheds that I'm telling you, I told you about before, you get more than 10% water quality like falls off a cliff. So urban area, urban development, all the impervious area has a big impact on stormwater. Residential development, we haven't had a lot of those subdivisions, but you know, many years ago, they were popping up all over the place. So residential development and obviously industrial and commercial sources, you know, add to the issue as well. So just to back up a little bit, this is not some program that Maine DEP decided to stick, you know, some of the Maine communities with. This is from the EPA. This is a federally mandated program that is run in the state by DEP. It's coming right out of the Clean Water Act back in 1972. EPA started looking at the wastewater sources, industrial activities in the really big cities back in the day. from 1972. Then they started dialing it down a little bit. But there was phase one communities. We're in phase two here now. Phase two communities, you need an urban area that's at least as big as 10,000. Not 10,000 in a town, but an urban area. So when they looked at all the census data and they determined how many people live in an urban population, that can cross town boundaries. You happen to be in one of the urban areas that meets these criteria. You've got over 10,000 people in the Lewiston, Auburn, Sabattis, Lisbon urban area, and you also have more than 1,000 people per square mile. That kicks you into this program. Lisbon was not in this program from the get-go. Based on the 2010 census, you have enough people, welcome to the club. You were one of two communities that was added in 2013 to the MS4 permit. So this rule covers towns, municipal separate storm sewer system, but it also covers state or federal facilities. None in this particular urban area, but up in Bangor, UMaine is smack dab in the middle of Orono. UMaine Augusta Bangor, right in the middle of the city of Bangor. EMCC likewise, Dorothea Dix campus, and the Maine Air National Guard facility also have their own permit, have to jump through the same hoops as towns. And also DOT and MTA, the Turnpike Authority, also have a permit for where their roads go through urban areas. So all of these folks are in the program, and as I said, this is an unfunded mandate for a program, but towns have been wrestling with that fact for a while. The trick is to come up with a management plan that can deal with that effectively. So as I said, a lot of states, they're asking EPA to run their version of a stormwater program. So back when this whole thing started in 2003 is when this whole MS4 thing, the phase two, the smaller communities in Maine, when that all broke. But the DEP asked EPA, they said, we'd like to run the show. Most states in the country do that. New Hampshire and Mass are two nearby states which actually are under EPA rule. That's not necessarily something based on my experience that a direction that you'd want to go. State regulators have actually been pretty reasonable to deal with as far as how they implement this program. So again, there are now 30 MS4 communities. This is a general permit, one size fits all. So Sabattis, pretty small town, you have the exact same permit as Portland, biggest city in the state, exact same permit. So similarly, Veazey up in the Bangor urban area, same permit as Bangor. So it's one size fits all, and it's a 5-year duration. So this last version, this is our third go-around with a 5-year permit, and we're just coming up to the end of year 2. And this one expires in 2018, and we know that every time DEP reissues a permit, they ratchet it up even more. The next permit is going to be based heavily on the EPA permit that I mentioned Massachusetts is under. There's things in that permit that are going to really ramp things up for Maine communities. We already have a lot to comply with, but we know based on conversations with both state and federal regulators that the game's going to change a bit in 2018. The trick is to be prepared for that eventuality. So again, I mentioned state or federally owned MS4s, and this whole program is dealing specifically with stormwater runoff. Okay, Lewiston, Auburn, urban areas. You have 4 regulated entities, and I told you since 2003, Lewiston, Auburn, Sabattis have been in this program since the get-go, and Lisbon and the town of York were added in 2013. So that's basically, as I said, because of the census every 10 years, the decennial census, they did one in 2000. You folks didn't have enough population at that time, didn't meet those criteria. But based on the 2010 census, that's the way it is. So this is the regulated area, and I mentioned, yes?
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't believe we have 10,000 people in our neighborhood.
Nope, it's an urban area. So if you look at Lewiston, Auburn, Sabattis, and Lisbon.
I heard what you said, but then you said that us in York, York's not even in our neighborhood.
Nope.
You're pulling
Okay.
us with somebody else?
Nope. There's 4 urban areas in the whole state of Maine, whole state of Maine that meet this criteria. There's Portland area,
We're
which you
talking
can.
about population size and how it had changed from
Yep.
whenever to whenever.
Yep,
Again, if you're pulling us with somebody, that doesn't matter, and if you're not, then we don't have 10,000 people.
no, you don't have 10,000 people in Lisbon per se, but you have enough people close to the urban area in Lewiston and Auburn that you got pulled in this time. So, based on EPA statistics, you have enough population from the 2010 census that you're added to this program, to that whole urban area. Not just in Lisbon, but to that area, and that's where you got brought in. They use, what's it? Yeah, it's greater than 1,000 people per square mile, and you have to be in an urban area. So any way you slice it, based on EPA statistics, you're in. Once you're in, you're not getting out.
So in other words, Lewiston probably increased in numbers and we
Yeah.
got pulled in because of
Yep,
Lewiston.
I mean, Bangor, the population didn't go up. Southern Maine is typically growing.
Together. So why are you
Yeah.
talking about both?
All right.
Doesn't make any sense to me.
So according to the EPA data, again, based on the census, this is the Lisbon regulated area. So the statisticians in Washington DC run the numbers, they look at all the people, and they develop an urban area that meets those criteria that I was talking about. And in Lisbon, you look at the crosshatches here, here, and here. These areas are what kick you into the program. Sabatis, you have an area near the pond and an area down in the southern part of the town. These are the regulated areas that meet those criteria in Sabatis, as defined by EPA. Part of what this area did, this regulated area, Lewiston, Auburn, and Sabatis originally, they formed a stormwater group. This is pretty common. It's very difficult for towns to go this alone. So your neighboring communities joined together, back in 2003 to try to, come up with a regional approach to meeting the permit requirements. There's an awful lot in this permit, a lot of specific details. Some things are tailor-made to work as a region and work statewide where you can. So there's a lot of combined efforts that people have been doing. Again, with Lisbon being a new entry into this MS4 program, you've got to make up a lot of ground. I mean, the permit allows for that. There's a schedule in the permit, for you to do things. But, you're behind the curve as far as what other towns have been doing. So we need to bring you up to speed. Sabatis has been in this from the get-go, as I said. They have a lot of work to do still to get into compliance. So the stormwater group, again, the periodic regular or regional meetings, they get together a couple times a year, my understanding, as from what I understood from the group leader, to talk about how they're gonna work together to make this program work. So they developed a regional stormwater plan. Sometimes communities will develop their own as a regional group. Lewiston, Auburn, Sabatis, and Lisbon team together to come up with the Androscoggin Valley Stormwater Group Stormwater Management Plan. And that's what you do with these plans. At the start of the permit, you sit down and you develop a strategy for complying for the whole life of that permit. You predict what you're gonna do over 5 years. If you find out, this is kind of a living document, if you find out stuff isn't working, you can change that, but you better tell DEP why you're changing it. So, best guess as to how towns were gonna manage that is in this plan, developed in 2013. DEP has seen this, but, if you find stuff that works better, doesn't work well enough, you can amend that plan to do a better job. So there's a lot of things that this group has combined with. One of these is the Think Blue media campaign. Have any of you ever seen rubber duck ads? But the whole state has latched onto this. We kind of borrowed an advertising campaign that was developed in San Diego, but they thought it was pretty good. It was called Think Blue campaign, all based on, you see a lot of rubber ducks. So, they had a television ad. Really, the theme is that they said, if stormwater pollution were rubber ducks, and they show a variety of, like, people, washing their cars in the driveway, all the suds going down, the suds turn into rubber ducks. pet waste turned into rubber ducks, drop of oil, all these things. And then they show the rubber ducks going down the catch basin, drain it out into a stream, going out into the ocean, and it just, exemplify how many different sources and what it all looks like when it finally hits a water body. So there was a whole media campaign. That was a statewide effort. No point, for Lisbon to go that alone, develop your own, media campaign. So DEP kicked in a bunch of money, all the towns participated, and that is a success story for a statewide approach. The only way, as I said, that you're gonna implement these programs, it is very difficult for any size town in this program to go this alone for one person. A lot of public works guys, it gets dumped on different town staff depending on where you go. Sometimes I've seen public safety get tasked with this. Public works is a common leader, but it takes a group of people. So whether it's Lisbon or Sabatis, we need to do this together. So I've already met with the Lisbon staff, Ryan, Dennis, Steve. We've talked about this. Same with in Sabatis. We met a couple of weeks ago as a group to figure out a plan of action, how we're to meet the permit requirements and follow that stormwater plan. So this is the only way to do it. There's a lot of different specifics in the permit requirements that are not going to be on code office plate, and they're not all going to be on Ryan's or Public Works plate. Public safety has a role in this. There's all departments in a municipality at somewhere or another get brought into this program. Kicking and screaming probably, but they get brought in nonetheless. So in this plan, this is right from DEP. What do they want you to do in 5 years? Yeah, come on in. There's a couple over here. Standing room only. I like this. Wow. So stormwater management plan, DEP says you need to figure out where stormwater goes. Where does your stormwater system discharge? So if a drop of rain hits here in Lisbon, we know where it's gonna end up, essentially. All the subwatersheds, the basin system, your ditch system, we know where stuff is gonna go. And then they have, this is another one of the acronyms I was talking about, called 6 minimum control measures. It's 6 focal points of this whole program, and I'm gonna go into just briefly blow through that just so you have an awareness. So we have the 6 focal points. Then we have to select best management practices. How are we gonna deal with each of those 6 topics? Then we've got to set goals over the 5-year plan. Then we've got to establish timelines over the 5-year plan. And then we've got to say, Dennis, you're responsible for this piece of it. Ryan, you're responsible for another piece. We have to assign responsible parties. So there's a lot that goes in these documents. The 6 minimum control measures, the focal points that I'm talking about, this is right out of EPA. This isn't coming from DEP. Everybody in the whole nation is dealing with these same 6 issues. So our regulators want us to help provide education and outreach to our regulated community. Want to help them, I call it, spread the gospel of stormwater. So you're educating the public about stormwater impacts. You're involving the public. You're going to see later this year that there will be a cleanup event, both in Lisbon and Sabatis. So you get people involved. You pick a priority watershed, and I'll get into that in a minute. But you pick an area in town, high visibility, you reach out to citizenry, and you get them involved in an activity that's to promote stormwater pollution prevention. Stream cleanup, really successful event that people around the state, all the MS4s, have something like this. Okay, this next one is probably the biggest ticket on this whole permit program. The education, outreach, and the involvement and participation help spread the word, get people involved. But that IDDE, illicit, well, it's supposed to be elimination there, illicit discharge detection and elimination. You have to know, as I said, Ryan, you've got to know all things stormwater in the town of Lisbon. You've got to know every single basin. It's got to have a unique name. You've got to know the storm drains, where they're flowing, what size, what type they are. All of that information, the ditches, you got to know that stuff. You got to know what the health of your system is. I mean, how is your infrastructure? It's out of sight, out of mind. I deal with a lot of different councils, And, you know, if it's underground, people tend to forget about it, it's not really a visible problem. But in the city of Bangor, for instance, it was just, you know, they're in the news a lot, because their system's failing, but they got everything from huge wooden pipes from, you know, like 150 years ago, to all kinds of different stuff in Bangor. They've got a lot of issues to deal with, but we've gotta know all that. We've gotta map all that, and if we find that there's an illicit connect, you know, somebody's floor drain is going into Ryan's system here in Lisbon, you know, it's an illegal connection. If somebody, like a gas station, back in the day, there was a lot of different connections. You'd have trench drains that would drain into, you know, the town system. Can't have that. If we figure out there are illicit connections or illicit discharges, industrial sources being tied into the storm sewer system, we have to detect them and we've got to eliminate them. Okay, this is a really big deal as far as the mapping component.
Where do they go?
What's that?
Where do you put them?
Well, it depends on what the site is. Gas stations, typically what they tell them to do is run dry shops. So they don't want them to have trench drains and those kinds of things. Or you're gonna have a holding tank. You know, a lot of places will have a, you know, buried tank, pump them out every now and then. Good question on residential sources. You know, you've gotta find another alternative. Those types of things. Some people do have, I mean, foundation drains, some of those things are allowed in the stormwater program. You know, foundation drains, you know, groundwater sources, there's a lot of what's called allowable non-stormwater discharges. So if you get a foundation drain that drains into Lisbon's ditch system, that's okay. But if there's any pollutants in there, that's not okay. So you can, you know, in the municipal yard, you can wash the pavement outside. That's fine, that can get in the storm drain. You start adding detergents, that's not okay. So there's allowable things and non-allowable, and you've got to evaluate, if you find a source, you got to figure out how to deal with that, and it depends on the situation, so.
I haven't heard you say put it in sewer yet.
Sewer, well, but, you know, you're not gonna combine some issues, but vehicle wash bays, that's an issue where I've seen a lot of them connected to storm drain system. That's a no-no, so vehicle wash bays, send them to an oil water separator into the into the sanitary sewer system. That's a really good option for vehicle washing. Depends on the source. Okay, good question though. Next one, construction site runoff control. This is the primary focus of code enforcement. You get a subdivision project, anything bigger than an acre in a regulated community already has to have a DEP permit, but in these regulated stormwater communities, it ramps it up a level. So Dennis has to go out in both towns. If he has a project bigger than an acre, he's gotta get those engineered plans, what was approved by a planning board. He's gotta go on site, make sure all the erosion control's in place. You're gonna go out after a rainstorm, make sure that erosion control is still in place. And you're gonna go out when that contractor is wrapped up, he's buttoned up that site, you're gonna go out at the end of the project and make sure everything is stabilized. And then you gotta have a piece of paper that says it is. So, all those projects that Dennis just reviewed, construction site, grass is grown, contractor's gone, now it becomes a post-construction site. So back in the day, engineers, I mean, I don't know, Mandy, you probably designed a ton of them too. I've designed a whole bunch of stormwater ponds. There wasn't as much focus many years ago about maintaining those, but if you're a regulated stormwater community, and somebody gives you a plan, you know, days where you can just design it and walk away, that's over. You gotta make sure, if it's publicly owned, if the town accepts it as, say, part of a subdivision, then the town's gotta inspect it. But if it's privately owned, Dennis is gonna receive a report every single year that all of that stormwater infrastructure that's draining to the towns, you know, if there's a private system draining into Lisbon storm sewer system, you better know that it's working. So this is it's a pretty big deal, ramping up a lot of efforts. We just haven't had a lot of development the last 5-6 years when the economy went south. There just hasn't been a lot of this. I mean, what we talked about, since you've been in the permit program in Lisbon, you know, we were scratching our head, maybe one. one project. Sabatis, really not much of anything.
Under an acre, right? Once we've done it, then
Yeah,
under.
a lot of small stuff, but none of those big projects that would trigger that acre, yes.
Okay, sort of a private issue. When I added on to my house,
Yep.
I added 2 bedrooms. So automatically I had to put in a new septic system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had to have an engineer come out, draw it all out, measure it all out, measure the wells
Yep.
and all that. That was 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how long is that septic system good for?
That's a good question. Because a licensed site evaluator came out, designed your system. Failing septic systems, I had mentioned that item right there, illicit discharge. Septic systems that fail are a big source. Nutrients, I mentioned that as some of the pollutants getting in there. Rule of thumb is, and Dennis, this is a permit requirement, this is on his list of things to do, he's gotta identify all septic systems over 20 years old. Okay, typically what the towns that I work with, it's more of an informational, you figure out, an informational campaign, a little education and outreach. We actually provide, a questionnaire, simple 5 questions. You send them to the septic system owners in town, and then you, at the same time, you give people a brochure on proper septic management. So 5 years, it depends, I don't know how quickly your solids tank might fill up, but Mandy's the wastewater person, I'll throw that at her.
Well, no, it's just the idea that,
Mhm.
I had to have a surveyor come out.
Yep,
and-
all that has to be designed by a licensed.
Yeah,
uh,
well, mine was, and I still have it.
Yeah,
And, he had to measure from each well,
yep, that's all part of the design, yeah, setbacks.
and it was depending on the year of the well, what it is.
Yep. So, you're on the radar, but, I mean, that's one of those things, 5 years, you're typically not gonna have a failure, assuming the system's working right. But that is one of the sources in urban areas. A lot of the town's gonna be sewered, but failing septic systems is one of the targets, so towns have to inventory that.
Anything over 20 years is going to hit.
That's the permit requirement, so that was just this go-round, this last permit.
Yeah, just to be clear, I mean, you said you just need to make a list of them over 20 years. It's not
Yeah.
automatically something over 20 years is going to be failing. It depends how many people live in the house,
Right.
how good your soils are. There's
Yeah.
a lot of factors. There's no one answer of when a septic system is no good anymore. 20 years is just a rule of thumb.
Yep. Thank you. Ask the expert. That's what I like. So pollution prevention, good housekeeping, you gotta mind your own shop is really what it comes down to. So Ryan, I'm gonna pick on you, you're the public works guy here. How are you storing your sand and salt? How are you salting your roads? How do you store your hazardous, the chemicals that you use? Do you have really good signage in your public works building? How are you maintaining your cemeteries? Are you spreading a bunch of pesticides and herbicides? All those things are part of pollution prevention and good housekeeping. So when I talked about all the departments get sucked in to this program, the grounds maintenance guys, they get sucked in. Public safety, if they're out on site, they're a target as well. How are they storing all their cleanup supplies? You get an auto accident, gas is leaking from the tank going into a ditch. That's a stormwater issue. So everybody in a regulated MS4 gets brought in. All right.
Explain also where we become liable. So
Yep.
a community next door to us that doesn't have to follow this regulation, from what I understand, once it enters our water system, we own it. It's our problem.
Right.
Doesn't matter where it came from, it's our problem, we own it.
So all these things, yeah, I mean, construction site runoff, okay, private owner doesn't do any erosion control, that chocolate milk slug is going into Lisbon's storm drain system, you own it. You have an ordinance that I think was kind of prompted this meeting. The ordinances that Lisbon is gonna adopt were presented a month ago? A few weeks ago at the
Right, yeah,
last council meeting. That's a requirement of this permit, is to adopt an illicit discharge, it's a non-stormwater ordinance is what it is. So if you find a source like I'm talking about, no matter whether it's construction site, runoff, or something from some other site, you actually have a legal means now, or will have, a legal means to get on private property to have that fixed. Before, people would say, sorry, you're not coming on, you know, so what, you know, my old oil tank is leaking in the, you know, in the basement, and it's going right to your storm drain system. You know, now you have a means to do that. It's a permit requirement. All right, let's blow through it. Yes?
I got a question. When excuse me, when you showed the watershed,
Yep.
okay, that was a wooded area. If someone has something up there, how can you tell in a stream what is natural decomposition and versus, you know, someone actually causing the pollution?
You're asking some really good questions. What we're gonna have to do, as part of this program, it's fine, we've mapped the whole system. Once a year, you go out and you've gotta inspect all of this infrastructure. So sometimes, you're not gonna know if it's like an agricultural source or, you know, what the culprit might be. But later this spring, once we've finished all our mapping, got all the whole system up to speed, we have to go out in the dry weather situation and figure out if it's dry weather, it's not gonna be stormwater. Hasn't rained in a few days. We're gonna go out, pop every single basin rim, look at every discharge point that we've identified in both Lisbon and Sabatis. If there's flow, we've gotta figure out what it is. And right now, we used to be able to say, yeah, it's probably groundwater, it's ice cold, crystal clear, no smell, it's probably just groundwater getting in a, you know, storm drain system, old pipes or something like, you know, old drains. We've gotta test all that now. So we've gotta look for, you know, maybe it's tied to a sanitary system, maybe it's tied to agriculture. So we've gotta look for indicators, and I don't need to go into all the chemistry, but we've gotta test that to figure out what the sources are. That's part of this program.
Unfunded.
Yeah, this unfunded program you mentioned, it's mandated, you know, that's the way it is. So, blowing through, this is right out of the Androscoggin Valley, the stormwater plan, that was put together, as I said, in 2013. Education and outreach, again, this is, you know, ripe for some regional collaboration on this. In the past, you mentioned, well, there's plans galore for education and outreach. It used to be really simple. Every time the permit comes out, they, you know, I told you, their DEP ratchets it up. So we've got a statewide awareness plan. Remember that? Yeah. Statewide awareness. We've got local stormwater behavior change plan. This regulated area, Lewiston, Auburn, Sabatis, and Lisbon, have chosen lawn and garden care. You know, the pesticides, fertilizers, how you mow your lawn, all those things have a potential impact on stormwater. So that's the target behavior that we need to look at here in these towns, okay? So you can expect, if you're gonna hear a lawn and garden message or go to the hardware store and somebody's telling you don't put phosphorus on your lawn, main soils typically are high in phosphorus, we don't need that extra fertilizer. Those are the kinds of messages that are coming out of this plan.
That ad that you see from
Yep.
Armstrong Hardware and Lowe's, why does the government let them get away with that ad?
Well, here's the deal, those folks are getting smarter. Scott's and those other folks taking phosphorus out of their fertilizer. So a lot of companies are doing that. What the message is, we're not telling people, don't spread fertilizer, don't, you know, do that type of activity. That's fine, but just at least read the directions. You know, people commonly, they'll go to a hardware store, buy the 50-pound bag, and just spread the whole thing, you know, whatever size lawn they have. Just understand what you need. You know, typical things you advocate, and I'm not a lawn care expert, you know, we rely, there's other folks at the state that know a lot more than me about this, so I listen to them. But what you do is, you might wanna test your soils, figure out, I mean, do you even need certain fertilizers? So you at least know what you're spreading, or if somebody comes to your house and spreads stuff, make sure that they have a clue too. So it's doing it, you know, just in a smarter way. Read the instructions, understand what your lawn might need, is really what it's about.
From what I remember from working in the industry, that the state now will not allow them to put phosphorus in any of the fertilizers unless it's a starter fertilizer.
Right. All right, Sabatis Pond just came up today. I was at a Maine water conference, which are more geeks like me, and you know, they're all sitting at a conference all day, but they were talking about China Lake was up there, the Belgrade Lakes, and they were showing some statistics and maps of what happens in, you know, these lakes that have heavy nutrient loading, specifically really high in phosphorus. And the algal blooms in, you know, midsummer, and Sabatis Pond was mentioned. So my understanding was that the pond gets blooms, is that?
Well, put it this way, if you
Yeah.
go to Google Earth
Yeah.
and do an overview,
It looks
you
green.
can't find Sabatis Pond on Google Earth because it's a farmer's field.
Right.
Honest God, all the bodies of water around it are blue and you cannot locate Sabatis Pond. It's that bad.
That's a big deal. I mean, these guys, some of the scientists today, there's some nasty data out there. And it was like in a 20-year span. They showed these, I think it was Belgrade Lakes, they showed these two blue dots like 20 years ago. That's where, you know, the blooms were. And then 10 years later, it was like a good, you know, decent chunk. And then now you look at the percentage, in another 10 years, it's all gonna be green every summer. China Lake, have you ever seen China Lake? It's nasty. I mean, it's just a green layer across the whole lake.
It's come up that way.
Yeah, and it costs a lot to fix that, is what it comes down to. All right, so we've got the statewide plan. We've got the lawn and garden stuff we're talking about. We've got municipal outreach plan. Little do you know, you're sitting here today as part of our municipal outreach plan. Check that box. All right, so educating municipal officials, planning boards, department heads, that's all part of the plan. Everybody's gotta be, you know, understanding stormwater. You might not have to be, you don't have to be experts, but you need to understand the gravity of this program and what's out there. So, municipal outreach plan. And the last one, this is a really big focus lately, targeted BMP adoption plan. Again, it used to be real easy, but now we've got 4 separate plans within this one aspect of the permit program, and they're focusing on salt. Whole statewide discussion, everybody knows that DOT, all they do is spread salt on, you know, state highways now. They switched over a while ago, mostly for economic reasons, but salt over the long haul, you watch, another 20 years, we'll be talking about how to fix streams from all the salt damage, because there's only a handful of DOT yards in the whole state of Maine that they even have salt, or sand storage anymore, all salt. A lot of towns are going that direction too. All right, so that's number 1. Number 2, pretty simple. We're gonna have, you know, we need to organize some participation events. We understand, Ryan, you mentioned Moxie Day. This year, we're gonna have probably a stream cleanup, but you get a really well-attended festival every year. We need to tap into some of those people, so.
We're gonna set up a booth this year.
Yeah, set up a booth.
We'll have a town Lisbon booth and we'll have stuff
Yeah.
on stormwater.
Easy targets, you get a lot of people coming and, you know, you just throw up a booth, you know, we buy a few ducks, you know, and just hand out lawn care brochures. Check in those boxes. All right, so stream cleanups, and also your target neighborhood in Lisbon is over in the unnamed stream. Alder Brook is another name, apparently. Unnamed stream, further up 196. We have to establish, as part of this program, a priority watershed. Unnamed stream, I told you, has a few issues that DEP is looking at. That's a priority watershed. So we're gonna go stencil some basins. Hopefully Dennis was looking into having some Boy Scouts help us out, involve people. They stencil like a lawn care message, you know, this catch basin drains to the river, something like that. Simple message, get people involved. Hang a door hanger on somebody's door with a little bit of lawn care information. That's the type of activity that we're talking about every year. Number 3, again, I hammered on this. Working with Ryan, we've got to know every basin, well, before I lose that point, Sabatis Pond is your priority watershed. That urban area draining to the pond is Sabatis's priority area. All right, so I just said mapping is key. I'm going to do a little plug for, you know, how you map in the next slide, but we've got to know where everything is, like size, type, flow direction, all the discharge points. We've got a really good handle on that so far. We need to find, you know, we need to do some field work this spring to tighten that up a bit. Storm sewer system map, that last piece there, As a result of this permit program, I don't know how many trees we've killed, there's more paperwork generated from this in the inspection program than you can imagine. Because DEP, EPA, doesn't matter who shows up, it's all about documentation. Everything Dennis does, everything Ryan does, all has to have a document showing that you did it. If you don't write it down, it never happened. All right, so we're trying to move away from that. I've talked to, Lisbon and Sabatis. We're gonna be collecting a lot of that stuff on phones now. I'm moving away from paperwork. It's ridiculous the amount of stuff you have to generate, but it's all required. All right. GIS, this is the coolest thing going. You collect so much data as part of this program and for other stuff you do. This is Town of Hamden's aerial photo map. The red is their regulated area. They've got water bodies, hard to see, but right, the little gray dots, the whole catch basin system. We got the orange lines are all the topography. Everything's in that system. We can call it, that's, clicking on a basin right here. You click on it on a map, calls up all the information. We could call up all the inspection data. Really good tool to manage it, and there's some reasonably priced options out there that I'm talking with both towns about as we speak. Priority watershed, I told you Lisbon, unnamed stream, Alder Brook, whatever you want to call it, is on a list. The state's already collected some data, not a lot, but it's on a list saying that it doesn't meet the quality that they expect. My understanding they're gonna collect some more data this summer, go back and take another look at it. They don't have a lot, but right now, it's on a list that you don't wanna be on, okay? If they determine that it still doesn't meet criteria, there is the possibility that you're gonna have to develop a specific plan to address that. We're not gonna go there now, but that's to be determined. The end result is that costs a lot of money. I told you, Bangor's spending millions and millions of dollars cleaning up 6 impaired streams. All right, Sabatis, portion of the Sabatis River that drains, I don't have it on a map, but that's priority watershed that was selected as part of that plan that I mentioned before. All right, construction site runoff control, these are the things Dennis is taking care of. He's got to go to those sites, make sure that they have a really good erosion and sediment control plan. Got to make sure all the structures are up so that they're not spewing sediments out to Lisbon or Sabatis' stormwater system. They've got to protect all their outfalls. If there's water bodies nearby, those contractors are held to task to make sure that they're not discharging pollutants from their site to your system or to water bodies. DEP is the hammer in this case. As I told you, anything bigger than an acre already has a DEP permit, but you're an MS4 community, so they lump it on top of Dennis, and you are charged with doing the inspections to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to. If there's issues, you can warn them once. If they don't want to cooperate, you're picking up the phone to DEP. They are the hammer. Okay, again, notice that this is going to show up a lot. Data management and documentation. More forms than you could ever imagine. All right, I told you that site's buttoned up. Now, Dennis, if we get any projects here in Lisbon or Sabatis, every privately owned system that's discharging to Lisbon or Sabatis, he's going to send them a memo every spring, say, hey, do your inspections, give me a piece of paper. Okay? There hasn't been hardly any projects going on, but when that does, when the economy turns around, people start building again, that's got to happen as part of this minimum control. Hey, look at that, data management and documentation. Have you heard that before? All right, last one, pollution prevention and good housekeeping. We're developing it's called an O&M plan. Every municipal activity in both towns that have potential to impact stormwater, got to develop a plan. I mean, it's all about the paperwork here. So, yes, it might be common sense, but we have procedures for every single activity that goes on in both towns that has a potential to impact stormwater. Ryan's going to have a specific plan just for his public works yard alone. Stormwater pollution prevention plan for maintenance activities just from public works. We're gonna have hazardous material storage plan, it's all in there, part of the permit. But you've gotta mind your own shop, you know, where you store the street sweeping, how you manage that, what happens with a catch basin residual. You know, every year those sumps, usually, I mean, say you got a 2-foot sump, fills up with grit, and you've gotta back that out. By permit, you've gotta inspect that every year. If that sump is over half full, gotta clean it. Once the street sweepings and the sand gets into the catch basin, DEP wants you to dispose of it properly. There's a lot of stuff tied in with this program. Again, back to the regional plan, we are really gonna lean heavy on what we can regionalize. That's the whole ticket to this. Okay, so I think we can save some efforts, training programs, those kinds of things where we can combine activities where it makes sense to. Those are the opportunities that I look for and the groups of towns that I work with. Again, we've made some progress. Lisbon's new to this, as I said. But, you know, we have a plan. We know what we're gonna do by, as I said, the end of the permit year is June 30th. So we've got work to do, same with Sabattis. A lot of work to do in Sabattis. But we've got a plan, talking about some really good things. We've got a stormwater team developed in both towns, and you know, we're moving down the right path. Any questions? You guys threw some good ones at me.
I got several questions. The first one I have is, you mentioned the schedule
Yes.
that you provided to get in compliance. Where would you say Lisbon is on the schedule?
You've already, I mean, you're compliant for the most part from the first permit year, as according to your plan. And we have some permit year 2 activities that we need to get done by June 30th. And we have a plan in place to do those.
That second year permit plan, how much is on that left to do?
We've got to tighten up our mapping. We need to do a public participation event. We've got to develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan for Public Works. We've got to tidy up your operation and maintenance plan. I've got a whole list of things. The biggest thing that's come out of this program recently is that I said State of Maine runs the show, right? EPA is still the mothership, okay? This is a Clean Water Act program. They've allowed DEP to run it, but they keep tabs on DEP. There's a fellow that's stationed, he lives just outside of Augusta, and he is looking in, performing audits of MS4 communities. This is a big deal. DEP, I've worked with them a long time. I know the regulations backwards, forwards, sideways. That's fine. I know what DEP is looking for, and I know how to work with communities and get the job done. EPA, they don't come in, you know, DEP, they'll work with you. We'll develop a plan. No, we can't fix every single problem here in Lisbon overnight. But if we show progress and develop a prioritized plan, they'll buy that. EPA doesn't take that approach. EPA wants to come in, find problems, and find it. Okay? So EPA just visited the town of Orono 2 Mondays ago. Spent an entire day with the town of Orono looking at everything to do with their stormwater program. They are coming to Lewiston. I think it's in a couple weeks. 14th, they're coming to Lewiston. And I just talked to another fellow at that conference today. They're coming to Auburn. EPA has their eyes on this cluster. They have their eyes on all clusters. They have asked for all DEP reports, anything coming out from DEP regarding the 4 communities in the Lewiston-Auburn cluster, have to go to EPA first. That's a big deal. EPA audits are extremely thorough. They ask a lot of questions. I've already been preparing communities that I've worked with for this eventuality. It's a proactive approach, but you go through the exercise, you figure out where your holes are in your program, and you can develop a plan to fix them. That's what I'm working with. The Olivers and I, we just came on board in December. So I'm getting the handle of all things Lisbon and Sabattis for stormwater program. but I've got an idea how to get things done. EPA, if they visit, they're gonna find, it's just like OSHA, they come and they'll find something. The point is, I don't want EPA to come here, find stuff, and find you that we could address. I don't wanna have to pay a fine and then have to do the work anyways. The trick is to try to get fully compliant as quick as possible and head off that possibility.
When do you expect DEP or EPA to visit Lisbon?
That's, again, a very good question. DEP will provide you a little bit of notice. EPA is gonna give you 5 days, okay? And I just said EPA's, they're already coming to Auburn, already coming to Lewiston, and they're gonna be poking their head around. DEP told me they have to do 11 audits, okay? I mentioned 30 MS4 community towns, and just say a dozen those nested state or federal facilities. So just say, well, and then DOT and Turnpike Authority. So we'll say there's 45 possibles in the state of Maine. They've got to audit 11 of them. DEP audit's really thorough. They don't go throwing around fines and, you know, the enforcement threats, the EPA approach. But 11 out of 45, that's a pretty high percentage. What EPA looks at, because they'll sit in their office back in Massachusetts, and they look for the easy targets. They're gonna look, go to the computer, they're gonna look, okay, have any of these communities had like a citizen complaint? Have you had beach closures? These are the common things they look at. Have you had wastewater issues, consent decrees, those kinds of things? Elevate your status for a potential EPA visit. Old Orchard Beach got a visit. They're an MS4 community because they have beach issues. A lot of nutrients, beach closures, those kinds of things. That raises your status. I can't say for certain when EPA is going to show.
Don't we have a consent decree?
So,
What kind of fines are they handing out?
okay, it depends on the situation. The maximum daily fine per violation can be $37,500 per day per violation. That's, yes, per day, per violation. That is unusual in the stormwater program. But for instance, City of Bangor, they've been visited by EPA 3 times in like the last 15 years or so, roughly 20 years. They got a visit now last fall. So they didn't have an up-to-date spill plan because of all the petroleum storage they had. That's in the neighborhood of like $8,000. If you don't have current stormwater plans, you know, pollution prevention plans, those things, $5,000. I'm just throwing out numbers, but these are numbers that I've heard that they've dinged communities for. So it's not going to be $37,500 per day, but that's right in the, you know, the federal law, the statutes.
Is there any evidence that this works, that all this actually works?
Is that, yeah, okay. This program works pretty well. We've had some really good successes. The impaired stream fixes, that's debatable. I mean, I'm telling you, City of Bangor is throwing millions of dollars. South Portland and Long Creek, that's in the news all the time. That's like, for engineers, it's like a gold mine. There's so much money that has to be spent down in Long Creek trying to fix that. The main mall, there's a tiny stream that drains, just like Bangor Mall, tiny little stream, Long Creek drains almost right through the middle of all that stuff. So, you know, with the Conservation Law Foundation's Environmental Watchdog Group latched onto that. They got involved with South Portland and Long Creek. That just, you know, amped it up a whole nother level, and, you know, loads of lawyer fees and the whole bit. But the impaired streams, that's a tough one. You could throw millions of dollars and not know for 10, 20 years what water quality improvements. The stormwater piece, there's noticeable differences.
Well,
Yeah.
it's
I'm going to you and then you.
What about the all private roads that run down here?
Private roads, you know, for both of you communities, we need to focus on what's in the permit. So private roads, I mean, you can have education programs for people to take care of their roads. if their road's getting to such a point where it starts impacting stuff that the town owns, then we're gonna spend a little bit more, time and effort tracking down those people. But we need to focus specifically on tasks that are gonna move both towns along to try to head off, you know, potential issues with any regulator showing up. Yes.
Is there anything going on either in Augusta or Washington? Because these are unfunded programs. These communities can only take so much.
No, I understood, and, I've heard that same argument for 12 years. Bangor, they trot out the same 2 engineers from their city staff and just scream at the top of their lungs. Deaf ears. It's just not gonna go anywhere. The trick is, and I guess my approach has always been, you know, we need to pick the low-hanging fruit. Let's take credit for what you're already doing in communities, because there's more than you think about. You figure out what the low-hanging fruit is and figure out an efficient way to get the other tasks done. Part of it is just developing more of a proactive culture, because a lot of the stuff makes sense, you know, rather than, you know, you see it, silt fences are, they're an easy target. People just tack them into the ground, it's just eye candy. They never actually install them right. So, I mean, just something simple like that, actually having, you know, proper device installation is gonna do a decent job at controlling, you know, sedimentation. If you put them in right, they work. So that's an easy target. So those kinds of things, you know, you pick the low-hanging fruit and what you can make a difference at and try to, you know, do it cost-effectively and efficiently.
Another thing you mentioned in all this discussion was the fact that, let's say Spas and Lisbon got together, corrected all these problems.
Yep.
But you said after 5 years, they're gonna crank the wrench. What does it end?
Wow, you're killing me with these questions. You know, that's just the nature of regulatory programs. The stormwater program, Massachusetts, okay, right now, we're gonna go out and we're gonna inspect dry weather outflow. I told you, to go out, it hadn't rained in a while, we're gonna go to every discharge point and take a look. If we have a flow, we're gonna look at it in a glass jar, see if it smells, go test it for a few things, figure out the source. Next go around, we can almost be certain that we're now gonna test, we're gonna go out when it rains, which kind of makes more sense to me, but you go out when it rains and you collect a sample, you're sending that to a lab. And you gotta measure for probably solids, you know, maybe, well, it'll probably be a whole suite of pollutants, I'm guessing. Suspended solids are a typical culprit. $7 a test from a lab, or just roughly. But you do that times every single discharge point that you have, those costs start to add up. They want a lot more information, because this is just stormwater, but the EPA in Orono, for instance, last week and a half ago, they're asking questions, okay, what do you know about how close your sanitary sewer system is, sanitary sewer, in relation to your storm sewer system? Where are the cross connections? Where do you have combined sewers? What are you gonna do about it? So the sanitary sewer system mapping, and then the EPA fellow was talking about, and Mandy can, this will roll your eyes, they wanted, oh, why don't you just send a camera down and inspect all of your lines? I mentioned this to Brewer, you can probably throw out a number, I can't remember, City of Brewer said something, but just, okay, from what you know about Lisbon system, a ballpark to camera.
I don't know, $3 a linear foot for every piece of pipe, because you gotta clean it, you can't
Right.
just camera it. 'cause
Right,
can't
you clean it first, get them through.
That's a lot of feet to pipe.
So, I mean, these are the kinds of things they're throwing out. Who knows what it's gonna be? But Massachusetts, we already know, they're gonna be the model for the next cycle of the main permit. And these are the types of things that are in that permit. So, every
They got
cycle.
to dump their snow in the bay this year, what?
Oh, yeah, I know, yeah. Well, in City of Bangor, they used to do the same thing, used to plow it right in the Penobscot River.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. You've had your hand up.
Yes, so there's a lot of fines going up, correct, all over the place?
Well, okay, correct that. DEP is working, they're visiting facilities, a lot of audits. DEP, again, and I work with them a lot, they're not typically finding people. EPA wants them to, and they've told them to. EPA is the finer. They're the ones that are
So EPA.
digging in your wallet.
So what is all that money used for? All the money they take in from fines and they just line in pockets, or?
They're self-funded.
Yeah, that's the thing, it pays for inspectors, that, you know, that's,
Yeah.
DEP will allow you can offset if you get fined, sometimes they'll allow you to do, well, and this is a double-edged sword, but supplemental environmental projects, rather than just paying DEP money, you can come up with something that might have an environmental benefit.
We know
But
all about
EPA,
that here.
yeah, exactly, so I'm not going there, but, you know, again, it was the same discussion I've had, well, Sabatis and other folks, I don't wanna give EPA money for stuff that we can address. So, you know, developing a proactive program, and, you know, you guys are starting from scratch in Lisbon and Sabatis, we have to catch up on a few, missing years, so there's a lot to be done, but if you set up a program, you know, a little more proactively at the start, it's gonna pay dividends over the long haul.
On a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being ready to go, where is Lisbon with this permit process?
Okay. I'm gonna throw out, let's just say we're 50 to 60%. We've got a lot of work to do, and we're gonna get it done in permit year 2. Then there's gonna be, because again, it's a 5-year program, and we're 2 years in, there's things we have to do in permit year 4 and permit year 5, so it's stretched out over time. But
What
we're in a
about-
good place in Lisbon.
What about for this
I-
permit year, ending June 30th? Where are we?
We'll say 60%. It's not bad. I mean, inspections, you've got it, you know, you do those in the spring. That's a big ticket. Public involvement activities up our way, you know, they're all occurring in the spring. So a lot of our tasks were backloaded, so that's pretty much the reason for that number. We're in good shape here in Lisbon, in my opinion, and I do a lot of this.
Do you see Thompson and Brunswick being added to this list?
Well, get this, I mean, I drive through Augusta, I just, you know, went to the Civic Center today. Augusta doesn't meet those thresholds, any of them. So, again, I told you Bangor area, Lewiston Auburn area, Portland area, and then there's a bunch of towns in southern Maine, because they're close to Portsmouth, that get brought into. Brunswick, Waterville, as you said, other Topsom, none of those communities are in this program. That's hard to figure.
Yeah.
Augusta, just, you know, when you drive through, Augusta goes and goes and goes, and, you know, the Sand Hill or whatever, you know, there's some areas in Augusta
Is
that,
it the EPA that puts this list out? Who's doing that?
it's all from census, it's, you know, they have people that get paid a lot of money to do statistics, and that funky red line that I showed you, yeah, that's National Census Bureau. But that determines urban compacts, a lot of other stuff too, I believe, you know, these towns, but. This is, again, this has been going on for a while, and then, you know, it started with the really big cities, populations of 100,000 and more, those big urban areas, and then they dialed back, you know, to the phase 2. You know, eventually they're gonna, you know, they'll bring them in eventually, and maybe there'll be a phase 3, who knows, but.
You mean to tell me Brunswick don't fall in there with the base? With the closer of the base?
Phil, is there a process to actually
Yeah,
try to take yourself out of it? I know it's not, there is an actual process to try, and there's a town that's been trying to do it, I think. From what I heard, there's somebody that's been trying to get themselves taken out. I don't remember who.
I've asked that question on behalf, because there's, I mean, up our way, UMaine Augusta Bangor is a pretty small campus. There's just not much going on. Even the Dorothea Dix campus up on the top of the hill, you know, where DEP is located up there, pretty small. They've asked the question, and pretty much point blank, no, once you're in, you're in. It's you know, you don't usually see populations go the other way. You'd have to have some pretty strong data to get out of this program.
The Androscoggin plan you referenced earlier, is that available somewhere on a website for the
That's it.
public?
You guys are hitting them all. What we're gonna do is, as I mentioned, electronically, what I wanna set up, what I'm doing with all the communities. I'm sick of paperwork, so what we're gonna do is set up a network system that town staff can access. So for data that Ryan's collecting for Public Works, he's gonna store it in there. We can make some of this stuff available. I mean, stormwater management plans, it's public information, so, you know, perhaps on the town website, we need to take a look at the website. That's a key mechanism or, you know, outlet for people to get the word out for stormwater education. So a lot of people have their plans out there. Your stormwater management plan is actually on DEP's website. What you file is a one-page form called a notice of intent to comply, so that the town's notice for this permit program back in 2013 and the stormwater plan that was developed is on the, and good luck finding it. DEP, go to waste discharge license page, go to MS4 general permit, and you'll find it eventually. Yeah, it's not logical how you're gonna get there, but waste discharge program, stormwater municipal general permit, and you'll see, you go down the bottom of the page, there's urban area maps, and in that, click on that, and that's where your plan is gonna be. It's tough to find, but we're gonna try to provide some of that information locally, but all data management, we're gonna have a pretty slick system here, electronic. If DEP or EPA shows up, I don't want Dennis, you know, scrambling around his office trying to find stuff, or Ryan or Steve or anybody. We're gonna have a clearinghouse for all that information. It's a really slick way. I mean, some of it's just the appearance. Makes it look like you got everything just in tune. Anything else? Come on, I'm ready.
Well, I brought up, just the only thing I had left was, and it was back to the subject we were talking about, but I know one of the biggest problems in Sabattis is Wales, who doesn't fall into this program, but all the phosphorus entering Sabattis Pond is coming from Wales. So it does get very frustrating for me that the contributor doesn't have to do a damn thing, but Sabattis is fully responsible for everything that they're doing to their water system. So, and then obviously that drains down Sabattis River to Lisbon, so we adopt the problem as well.
Because that's what, I was talking with a guy that works with DOT, and he used to work at DEP, but he was talking about, they wanted to actually make Sabattis stream impaired, because it has really bad water quality, but then they realized that all the water quality in the river is coming from all the issues in the pond.
Right.
So then they said, okay, the pond is impaired, so that's what they're working on, but they wanted, or they talked about bringing.
But the frustrating thing is a pond like that covers 2 town lines.
Yeah.
and
Oh, yeah,
I know
yeah.
The old farmers' fields and all the stuff they buried in there and everything else was contributing all the phosphorus to the pond. But yet they're not regulated in any way, so it is very frustrating for a lot of your hearings. Only some of us have to do this, and with the fines they're talking, but yet other municipalities that contribute just as much don't have to do a damn thing.
Right.
So that's the part that's very frustrating to me. It's either statewide or it's nothing, and unfortunately that's not what it is.
So Lisbon got out the current cost of cleaning up whatever's flowing through.
Well, the pond's a different issue. I mean, this is strictly stormwater, surface water quality issues across the state. Like I said, the impaired streams, they're looking specifically at the water body. What we're talking about today, or tonight, is specifically how both towns manage stormwater, minimizing that impact on receiving water bodies, Sabattis Pond included. So, regardless of what's happening in Wales, you folks have to mind the shop here in Lisbon and Sabattis to minimize what you're doing. That's a permanent requirement. To deal with stormwater runoff in your municipal separate storm sewer system.
So what you're saying is Sabattis is responsible for what they're putting in the pond, but not necessarily for what Wales is putting in the pond.
Yeah, I mean, what happens with these impaired stream issues, and using Long Creek as an example, there are ways to get at people that are contributing. You know, so South Portland is an MS4 community. Long Creek has a lot of issues. What they use, it's a mechanism called Residual Designation Authority. It's a legal mechanism, RDA. So there you go. I can throw acronyms all night long if you want. But RDA is the tool that you can use. So if you know you've got a bad actor upstream that's, you know, really the source of the problem, you can bring him in with a legal means and make him be part of like a restoration plan. And that's what they're doing in Long Creek. The Conservation Law Foundation showed up, and again, they started really stirring the pot quite a bit. and that mechanism was used a ton to bring in all kinds of people. What they end up having is were a lot of separate discharge licenses, random sources, you know, well up the watershed were brought in using RDA, and they make all these, like, businesses and stuff have a discharge license, so it can get really involved, but even with the pond, that actually, if it ever came down to, because they would identify stakeholders for Sabattis Pond, and this is not stormwater, but that's what you'd end up doing, figuring out who's contributing. You know, that's a separate issue, this is stormwater here tonight, but, yeah, they reclaim the pond, they figure out who's discharging and make them work together. Thank you. I got a whole ton of business cards. You can fire me emails, stuff you didn't think about or didn't wanna ask. Either way, I'd grab a card if you want one. Just keep in tune. You're gonna see all this stuff. You know, just when you look around, you know, look down, see a stenciled storm drain, or, you know, see stuff happening in town, you know, advertisements, public participation events, all part of this program. And, you know, again, I'd like to get, you know, to the extent possible and what makes sense, you know, have those events status, if they can work together to save a buck or two, it's a good way to go.
I don't know if you can answer the question, but have you seen what municipalities are budgeting for, you know, similar municipalities our size for even administering this
All
program?
right. I'm just gonna throw out a scary number. What towns are doing now, and that's, you know, this may be the direction, these programs cost an awful lot of money. So let's take the city of Bangor, for example. They've got stormwater issues, they've got impaired streams. They developed, and these are becoming more common, they developed what's called a stormwater utility. You pay your electric bill, you pay your sewer bill, they're paying a stormwater bill. So what it does is, so what happens now is the taxpayers that are bearing the brunt of fixing all the issues. Let's say there's a lot of churches in Bangor, a lot of nonprofits, you know, universities and college campuses, they're not paying their fair share of dealing with stormwater issues. So the way that a lot of communities happening all up and down the eastern seaboard, a lot on the west coast, not as many here in New England, but what they're doing is instituting utility. So you pay based on the amount of, you know, hardtop or rooftop, the impervious area that you have on your site. So homeowners in Bangor pay $22 a year to a stormwater utility fee. Funds are designated specifically to go to paying for stormwater costs. In answer to your question, they did an analysis of everything they spend in stormwater. They spend approximately $2.5 million per year in City of Bangor dealing with stormwater stuff. And that covers everything from public works stuff to impaired streams to permit compliance, all the fees. They added it all up, $2.5 million. So if Ryan went through this exercise, and that's one of the EPA questions, they asked Orono, what are you spending? Because this is their little measuring stick. How much do you spend a year in your stormwater program? It's not a permanent requirement, but this is the question. They asked Orono, they're asking everybody that EPA visits, what are you spending on stormwater? I guess they're trying to gauge whether you're taking that program seriously. It's not gonna be $2.5 million here in Lisbon or Sabattis, but if you start adding all the things, you know, ditching and, you know, just regular maintenance, but it's improving your stormwater system, you'd probably be surprised if Ryan went through that exercise to itemize everything that's part of that, you know, roadway, you know, road resurfacing, that kind of stuff isn't gonna count, but associated ditching to manage the runoff would count. You tally that all up, you'd probably be surprised. I don't have a good number for you, not $2.5 million, but I don't even know if I'd want to ballpark that.
the exercise.
Yeah, yeah.
Just wanna make sure everyone signed the.
Yeah, the
sheets.
sign-up sheet, I'd love to know, again, who's here and,
We didn't get it over here.
all right, sign in. You're on the list. That's the stream cleanup volunteer list. So, yeah, you didn't know that.
Elected official.
Yeah. It's a mean program. You show up maybe they'll give you a duck, there you go.
Now, I have a red red duck with devil horns.
There you go, I got
Sabbath
this.
song.
Oh, yeah.
Take it, that was the scary duck.
Yeah, that was a weird one. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Phil.
Yep.
Thanks, Phil.
Yes. Yeah, grab a card, any questions, just whatever, I'm working for you folks now, so.
You remember that in the early sixties?
Are you guys gonna come back for the second 3-hour shift in a little bit?
You could not drive a car.
Go all night?
Population is 14.
Seeing no other questions, we'll recess the meeting and we'll begin again with, the council has one action to take on a resolution. All right?
You bet.
It's a lot of nonsense to me. It's just the way the government just is.
That's why.
$1 out of you, get you worried about something that.
I want one of these mics more often because I can push it and be quiet. I want one of these. I'll sit just like this. I will just sit here with my hand on that
Do a
button.
roll call again? Or are we good without it?
We already took it.
No way EPA's coming to listen.
Why, what?
To recess the
I
meeting.
want to replace my mic with this mic so I can just
Turn it off.
Put some money up on the table.
You guys all
Call the
set?
meeting back to order. Well, you need to be in a regular meeting to take action. on
Okay, so
council.
we'll just do roll
let's
call
open-
again.
Open it back up.
Good evening. I'd like to call the Lisbon Town Council special meeting for Tuesday, March 31st to order. We already did the Pledge of Allegiance, so we'll skip that. We can move on to the next item, please.
Okay, and roll call, the same councilors are present?
Yep.
And the first item on your agenda is the council orders, resolutions and ordinances, Order 2015-74, a resolution for Public Works heavy-duty truck financing.
This is just some housekeeping. You already, at a November 5th meeting, authorized the finance director to obtain a lease purchase agreement or funding for the purchase of this truck. We're going to do a promissory note instead. And since we're doing it with a different bank, they need to have an opinion from our legal counsel. And the legal counsel will not issue the opinion until they get an actual vote from the council that we are going to finance this truck through Kennebec Savings. So that's why we're here tonight. And we're doing this a little bit different. It's not going to be a lease purchase. It's going to be a promissory note. And typically, on a lease purchase, the day that we close, we pay the very first payment. So we have the money in the budget to do that. But what we're going to take that first payment or that amount is we're going to issue that as a down payment, and then we're going to borrow the rest. So we're going to save money in the long run. And that's how we're going to do our loans in the future if we have any of them. So we do have the recommendation is authorize the borrowing of up to the aggregate principal, and it's not going to be that amount. We're actually going to be borrowing the $42,134 for a term of 4 years. Principal amount of $52,000, up to $52,669 from Kennebec Savings Bank at an interest rate not to exceed 2.39% for a term not to exceed 4 years, and to execute a promissory note and related loan documents to KBS for purchase of a 2015 Ford F-50 from Whited Truck Center, the bid for which was awarded by the council in Council Vote 2014-237 on November 5th, 2014. The town manager or the finance director, either singly, is authorized to execute and deliver the promissory note and related documents. And then in the back is the resolution that you will need to sign tonight. So that's the recommendation.
Okay. I'd open the floor for a motion from council.
I'll make the motion.
Is there okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any other discussion regarding this?
I have just a point that Usually we allow the public to
Yeah,
speak
I'm gonna
before.
do, I'm gonna do that
Okay,
before.
before we take a vote, I just want
Yep.
to make sure the public has a chance.
Yeah, it was my plan.
Okay.
Only thing I had is, this is a different bank than we typically go through. 'Cause we
Yes.
typically use Androscoggin,
Right.
correct?
Yes, and we chose this bank because the interest rate was much lower.
Perfect. Any other comments or questions from council? All right, the agenda is kind of a little backwards tonight, but so I did want to make sure I opened it up to the public if anyone has anything they'd like to say regarding this Public Works truck. It's your opportunity. Mr. Fillmore?
Larry Fillmore from Lisbon. Has the finance director approved, I don't know, recommended this?
Yes.
He did, because when I talked to him, he talked about lease purchase, that he didn't like that idea at all.
Right, and that's not what this is.
I understand that, okay. But it's been through him.
Yes, he's the one that
I have no
obtained.
problems with it.
Yep.
I have no problems with this.
Yep.
Okay? I do have a problem with this, us not being allowed to speak prior to the vote. Okay, on the agenda, having the audience participation after the vote is a moot point because you can't change anything. As is on this agenda, the audience participation follows your vote. And I know that Mark brought this up and you allowed us to go up here, and I think that's excellent. But the point is that if we can't talk on agenda items after you vote on it, that's like, there's nothing to talk about at that point, because you already did it. So we need to ensure, and this has happened more than once, that the audience participation was after the vote. We need to take and ensure that audience participation is prior to any vote.
Thank you, Larry. And it was a simple error coming out of the office. I saw it as soon as it came out. I made a note to myself to make sure I opened it to the public before we did a vote.
That.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? All right. We have a motion from Councilor Bickford, a second from Councilor Garrison. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Order passed, 7-0.
And the next item, please.
Do you still need to do audience participation and response on agenda items?
We do not.
Okay. Order 2015-74 to adjourn.
Open the
I'll
floor
make
for
that
motion.
motion.
Is there a second?
A second.
All those in favor? Greg?
Order 7-0. Passed.
Meeting adjourned.
Yeah, we can adjourn tonight. Okay, a lot of the stuff you had on the slides I sent to you.
Thank
I
you.
sent everybody links to it.
Thank you.
There's 2 links.